Hello, this one's for Robbie and whoever else might be interested. Traditional grip, just my spin on it, which has just come from other people. Um, just done 4 hours of whippersnipping because it's Australia, so I'm having a beer. Hope you are too, Robbie, on Sunday. So anyway, here it is. When I learnt, probably heard this before, sorry if you have. When I learnt, it was this thing, you put your hand out straight like that, stick goes in, and then you practice being able to do that. And hopefully the stick, and so you've got the strength within this fulcrum here, and the stick isn't sliding up and down and moving around too much. So you should be able to basically play it back, sit there and play it like that, in that position, which of course you wouldn't do. There's a couple of different schools. My one, funnily enough, I didn't really work on it that much. I just got it from my dad. So my thing is really more this gun thing, right? And this is something I spoke to Weckel about this, and he gave me the gun example. The gun, right? So it's kind of like this thing. And you'll notice my thumb here is just kissing that second knuckle. It's very light, but that's almost like my little point of feel or touch or something. You can see like my fingers aren't hooked over because we're doing the kind of the gun version, So I've got this thumb just kissing the second knuckle there very lightly. I'm kind of on top of the stick, but I'm not over the stick, and I'm kind of going down the stick. So that means that these fingers underneath are also part of the way I control the stick. So if I'm playing like just a wrist stroke like that. Other thing is older players, or more so in like older rock and roll styles and rock styles and stuff. Sorry, I'm looking at this instead of the thing. You would do two things. They would sometimes play like quite underneath like this, which I wouldn't really recommend. And they would play both of those where they're sort of hooked over more and they're playing underneath. You kind of want to not be too underneath like this. You almost want like, the side of your arm here, in line with your thumb almost. And if you see an extreme example of that would be like Tony Williams, where he's almost like on top of the stick. So that brings me to the next thing, which is another way you see more commonly also with the older players and older jazz players, but it's just a thing that you use. Just like on the right hand, where you might choke up on the stick if you're in a low volume situation, that type of thing. With traditional, you'll see guys who have the stick a lot more buried, and the fingers are hooked over a lot more, So instead of this gun thing, it's almost like this kind of thing, and you'll see the thumb kind of sticking up. And often with that, you're getting a lot from your first finger, and you're much more over the top of the stick. So if you bury the stick deeper inside your hand and get over the top of it, you can play a lot more quietly, and you can play a lot of, like that jazz kind of detail, little light notes and stuff like that. A really good example of that, there's lots of them, probably like Antonio Sanchez. I don't know if you're into Antonio Sanchez, but in the jazz context, he really has quite an exaggerated version of that, where you're burying the stick almost as deep as you can in your fingers, and you're playing quite up on the stick as well, as opposed to like the gun, which is like this, which is probably more about, molar stroke and bounce and playing at louder volumes. Try not to go on. I like it. So anyway, hopefully this is helpful. Then you've seen the dudes like Steve Jordan, Todd Sucherman, or any traditional player who's playing backbeat, heavy backbeat music, where they're playing back on the stick, of course, to get leverage. And with that, you might find it's a bit of an in-between, or it's probably going to be, going to have a bit more of a grip on the stick so you can really dig it in, Last thing is a thing that I do that I think is the thing that a lot of people compliment on or comment on, is basically the thing I got from Buddy Rich, is just this sort of opening and closing thing where you get a double. So it's like really just opening and closing. Buddy Rich is probably the best example of that. He doesn't move too much. His is really smooth. Weckl does it as well. A version of it that would be the kind of extreme version of it, where it's opening like right up, is, and pardon me for forgetting his last name, Grayson Newcomb, is it? The young kid who's just been out here. So if you look at, he does that thing, but his is very exaggerated, his open close, where he's really opening the hand. If you look at his grip too, he plays a bit more buried. And all of these you can, of course, interchange and use depending on what's required and everything else. But to summarize it, those are the basic things, like the starting point. The gun version, which is like watch Weckl or Vinnie Colaiuta, sort of maybe like the modern version, and also Buddy Rich, with the thumb sort of kissing on the second knuckle, just very lightly, and the two fingers kind of straighter down the stick, like that. And then like the more old school buried version where you've got the hook. And, some guys you see playing really quite underneath, to the point where I think that's not a good idea. But as you know, whatever gets you a result is the main thing. So that's basically my trad grip. And then, a lot of it is that opening and closing, which is what creates that constant roll, or at least the impression of that constant roll, like every 16th note or 32nd note's always being filled in. And a lot of that is just by letting the stick go and letting it bounce. Let me know, I love talking about this stuff, so if that's helpful, I hope so. And if you have any more questions about it, hit me up. And do some mulling. And enjoy the beer after the mulling. It's the greatest beer.